So we're working together to deliver a 2-day workshop where we're going to talk about trauma-informed practice in martial arts with 2 examples. The first day is about trauma-informed martial arts, so what that is. And then the second day is about Love Fighting Hate Violence, which is a not-for-profit organization in the UK which uses martial arts as an avenue to teach kids respect, boundary setting, and consent.
Hi, Georgia. Great to see you. And I'm gonna start with a confession. I am feeling very guilty and very embarrassed because last time when you had me on your very great show, I said I'm gonna have to get you on my show, and I totally forgot. Guilty as charged. I'm not gonna make excuses. I totally forgot. I don't know how it slipped my mind, but anyway, rectifying now. Lovely to see you. And how are you?
Likewise. Thank you. I'm good. It's getting a bit colder down here in Australia now. So, yeah, I'm excited to almost be heading up to the Northern Hemisphere to escape our winter. But otherwise, very good.
Uh, don't get your hopes up because here is freezing. It's still like a winter. It's meant to get warmer, but it's still freezing. So we're gonna talk about the event in a minute. But for
Mhm.
my listeners, I'm not sure if anybody is aware of who you are and what great work you do. Could you give us a brief introduction?
Absolutely. My name's Georgia, and I run a small not-for-profit called the Conscious Combat Club. So we deliver trauma-informed kickboxing programs for women and gender diverse people here in Melbourne, as well as online. As far as martial arts go, I'm agnostic. I think I love all of the martial arts that I've tried. I spent 10 years doing Kyokushin karate, maybe 5 or 6 years competing in Muay Thai and kickboxing. And I also do Brazilian jiu-jitsu now as my new fun martial art to try to conquer. I love not being very good at a martial art and having to spend time trying to figure out how to upset people's balance and, use leverage and all these different tactics that are very new to me, having a background in striking. Yeah, that's kind of me in a nutshell. Just a very big fan of martial arts in general, and that now extends to trying to find ways to make martial arts more accessible for people who otherwise wouldn't want to step foot into a gym, and specifically for us and our work, that's survivors of gender-based violence.
hmm How did you get into kind of well-being, if you might say that, or helping people recover? How did you get into that?
Yeah, I love framing it as well-being. I initially got interested in exercise science, which is my study background because of martial arts, but very quickly realized that I wasn't interested in making the 1% better, which is a
hmm
common saying in the sports science world, which basically means working with athletes is working with this tiny portion of the community at getting a tiny little bit better. And it's hard to really find that work meaningful. It can be if that's the thing that you're truly passionate about. But for me, I wasn't passionate about it enough for it not to have that really fulfilling component to it, where it felt like you were making a big difference in people's lives. So I pivoted in my career away from combat sports and into exercise science, physiotherapy, treatment of things predominantly like lower back pain, to try and find a way that I could make a difference in people's lives, which was great. It was missing the combat sports element though. And so when I met a psychologist actually through that work who was
hmm
looking to be able to refer students or clients to a kickboxing program that was trauma informed, he said to me, you have this interest in helping people in mental health because there's a huge mental health component in pain as well. And I think it actually could be great if we work together on this project. which I had never considered. But as soon as I thought about the idea that you could use kickboxing and you could teach people kickboxing for something other than preparing them for a fight or for losing weight, I was very, very much hooked.
Mm. So how long it took you, because I've seen on your website that you are working with a government organization. I can't remember the acronyms, but NC something something and A something something. Sorry, rubbish
Yes.
for memory. My memory is terrible. Um, how long it took you to actually get recognized in somewhat and cooperate with the organization? Because here in UK, I'm trying to do this well, and it took me about 5 years to get recognized and into a kind of put my foot into the doors of my council, and now kind of they recommend me for people with mental health issues and projects and different stuff. So how long did it take you to kind of get recognition and stuff?
Yeah, so the thing that you're talking about in Australia, we have something called the National Disability Insurance Scheme, or the NDIS, which is a government program that supports people with disabilities to access supports that they need that are unique to them. And there are various different ways that people can be supported through this system. There are three streams broadly. I don't want to go too much into this because I'm sure it's not that exciting for people, especially outside of Australia. But essentially, in Australia, there are two streams where people are really empowered to access supports that they choose that they would like to work with. So they don't have to be practitioners who are registered with the NDIS. They
Hmm.
can just be practitioners who work in certain fields. And one of those is exercise.
Hmm.
And so people can actually reach out to us and we can work with their support coordinator on a person by person basis. We develop a plan that then gets approved and they say, like, yes, we can see why learning a martial art would be beneficial for this person. I haven't got trauma informed martial arts explicitly recognized yet. That's very much on my to-do list, I suppose, that I think is going to take quite a bit longer. We're in a very fortunate position in Australia where actually we can support people with disabilities quite easily, I think,
Hmm.
relative to the rest of the world, although there's reporting and lots of boring admin stuff that definitely goes with that. But yeah, I think we're actually quite fortunate in Australia. So probably less my good work and more just my fortune at being in a country that I think does a decent job at looking after people with disabilities.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, well, I'm trying on my agenda. It is as well to try to create karate for mental health being as recognized as a on the same level as the dance or art therapy, because I don't think so. It's much different. It's just kind of get that modalities and
Mm-hmm.
stuff recognized. And as you know, probably in Australia is the same paperwork, 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 and it's just the hard work. But your program is getting recognition outside. I've seen you got some South Africa flag, I think, and the other countries' flags on your website. You're gonna be in UK. You can tell us what you've been doing in UK.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the biggest piece of recognition that we've been able to get from the Australian government so far is being recognised as a not-for-profit.
Hmm.
So we've been able to convince the government that trauma-informed kickboxing is a form of what they call benevolent relief,
Hmm.
which is that there are populations within our communities that experience distress based on a whole range of factors. But for us, the argument that we put forward is to say that people who have experienced violence in their lifetime are at a disadvantage from that. They experience distress from that, and kickboxing can be a part of the thing that relieves that distress. And therefore, you should recognize us as a formal charity, which is quite a big process. And the government have actually said, like, yes, you've given us enough evidence for that, which is great. But and in terms of what we're
Awesome.
doing in the UK, I have a relationship with Dr. Alex Channon, who your audience may or may not be familiar with, does
Hmm.
fantastic research in the martial arts space, has a very broad area of interests, and where ours really intersect is around areas of consent,
Hmm.
what that looks like in full contact martial arts, embodiment, and gender and martial arts. And so we're working together to deliver a 2-day workshop where we're going to talk about trauma-informed practice in martial arts with 2 examples. The first day is about trauma-informed martial arts, so what that is. And then the second day is about Love Fighting Hate Violence, which is a not-for-profit organization in the UK, which uses martial arts as an avenue to teach kids respect, boundary setting, and consent. And so in terms of the trauma-informed martial arts piece, what that looks like in practice is talking about how we embed trauma-informed principles in our practice as facilitators. And that looks like how we embed safety, collaboration, support, respect, and trust. Which
And that's gonna be 2 days event in end of May, isn't it?
Yes, the 30th and the 31st of May at Brighton University.
Which is exactly where I'm in Poland, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But guys, I'm gonna put the details in show notes. So I highly recommend to go and listen. This is something which might be hugely beneficial for your clubs, and it's just generally interesting concept. And so you're working with women who went through the phase of abuse or have a traumatic um, experiences, and what results you see after them joining your club, and how that is structured, how do you approach people? Because for me, I've got few clients who are after traumatic experience as well, and I think it's very individual to everybody, and I need to kind of I don't know how to say it, but the filter, maybe tiptoe around, because being a man, I'm kind of never understand how the woman actually feels. So I have to be very careful and gentle to not kind of upset them and kind of bring that trauma back into through the training.
Absolutely. I think, like you say, it's definitely correct that everybody experiences trauma differently. We're all individuals. So everyone, I think, experiences everything differently. But there are 3 really wonderful things that trauma-informed kickboxing can do for survivors. And those are help them connect to their body, help them practice setting boundaries, and to help them practice grounding skills. So one of the common things that happens when people have experiences where their bodies aren't safe is that they no longer are able to be fully in their bodies. As a defense mechanism, their brain learns how to shut down a connection to feeling things like pain and stress and all of these really overwhelming things that happen as a result of trauma. Of course, the problem with that is that we can't selectively numb. And so that means that people are no longer experiencing pleasure and joy, and even things like hunger and thirst. And so that's why we see a really tight relationship between eating disorders and trauma as well. And I think martial arts, and I'm very biased, all activities have their merits, but martial arts is such a wonderful way to help people connect to their bodies, not just because all martial artists listening will know that as you cultivate your ability to practice techniques, you are learning how to connect to your body. You need to. Your map of where your body is becomes very detailed because it's those small millimeters of adjustment that make the technique effective or not. And so there's that component naturally. When we take a lens that is trauma-informed and therefore puts specific emphasis on connecting to the body, and so has moments in the class where we'll say things like, you might notice your shoulder fatiguing as you throw this hook, or during stretching, maybe you feel a stretching sensation here. Perhaps you can notice a difference between your left and your right side. Like why do you feel that you're a southpaw stance? What does that feel differently to when you stand in an orthodox stance? And how in your body do you know there's a difference in power here? Those questions are so powerful because for a lot of trauma survivors, slow activities like, for example, meditation and yoga, where there's a lot of opportunity for thoughts to rush in, can be very overwhelming, right? There's all this time for flashbacks to come in, but also just more commonly it's thoughts like, I'm not good enough, I'm so bad at this, am I doing this right? And that becomes therefore the distraction. That becomes what we're focusing on. And anyone who's ever tried to meditate will know that thoughts just constantly pop at us. Yep. And it's a practice to get better at that. For some people, they're practicing this over and over and over again, but they're not getting anywhere with it because they just cannot shut those thoughts out. But with kickboxing, there's a bit going on. Like we're learning a technique, we're moving our bodies. So there's more for us to focus on. And I kind of liken this to being that there's just enough other things going on that we can actually be really present and focus on our bodies in a way that doesn't feel as overwhelming as total stillness would, which can sound a little bit counterintuitive to non-martial artists, I think. And martial artists always are like, yeah,
Mm.
obviously, that makes so much sense. So that's the real first thing that I think people can pull from trauma-informed kickboxing, is that they can reconnect to their bodies. And that's the feedback that I'll get from clients, is that they're like, I can feel my shoulder. Today when we were doing the hook was the first time that I felt this connection to my body. Those skills will then start to translate outside, where they might say, you know, I'm starting to notice hunger signals again because I was practicing being in my body. Because again, we can't selectively numb, and then that will start to spill outside of the work that we're doing in the sessions. I want to be mindful that I'm not just talking at you in a constant
No.
stream. So that's the first thing.
So on that meditation thing, I think this is brilliant because that you cannot think about other things when somebody tries to punch you in the face. It's
Yes.
just simply you have to focus on that one activity. If even if it's a gentle sparring, not trying to literally take your face off or head off, but then you're
Mm.
focusing on it and you've got that break from everything else. That's what I love about martial arts, and that's exactly the same feedback I've got from my clients that, are we doing this activity now? I need to focus on it. There's no time for anything else. All the problems disappearing for that hour and a half. I've got a break. I can relax, focus on one activity, but I never thought about it, like you said, that you can reconnect the body through that. I think it comes naturally, and because I don't have much clients with that kind of problems, but I'm still in it. It's gonna be added to the repertoire.
Yeah, I think it sometimes surprises me even how many people are disconnected from their bodies, because even when we don't think about trauma, we're very externally focused these days. Our awareness is typically in other people and technology, and we don't spend a lot of time going inward. I think it's like a trend on TikTok for kids to go for a walk without listening to music. Like, that's the point of
Outrageous.
distraction that we've gotten to as a society. I know. And they're like, we're trying this new thing. um, but we joke about it, right? But that is really the point that we've gotten to. And I think that is part of the reason why people struggle to be in their bodies, is because we are so externally focused. Just like learning a jab and a cross, a hook, those are all skills. I think body connection is a skill, and it is one that we practice with repetition. And that's one thing that I love to highlight to clients, is that you might not get this straight away. If I invite you to notice a stretching sensation in your hip while we're doing a stretch, and you don't feel a response when you speak to your body, there's nothing wrong with you. Very
Mm,
common and normal to be disconnected from our bodies. But just like we can learn a punch or a kick as a technique that we practice with repetition, it's the same thing for body connection. If you can be like, okay, I don't feel a connection now, try somewhere else, try it later in the class, try it next time you come back, that repetition builds up. And eventually there's this like aha moment where people
mm.
get that connection to their body, just the same as when people are trying to coordinate pivoting their foot and kicking around for a roundhouse kick. At some point, it starts to make sense. And so I think body connection, if we look at it like a skill, just the same as we do all of our techniques that we're cultivating through practice, it becomes a bit less overwhelming, and maybe a little bit easier to speak nicely to ourselves, to not say, like, what's wrong with you? Why can't you feel anything? Why don't you have a map of your body? Because when you first start addressing that, it's quite overwhelming. It's a lot to think about. Whereas when you're not addressing it at all, you don't know what you don't know. And so you're just going through the world numb. And in some ways, that feels better than realizing that
Mm.
you are numb.
Yeah, I think that that's the biggest problem, at least for me personally, is that my worst enemy is myself. I will criticize myself for every little thing, and it took me a long time to just let it go. It's okay. I just started BJJ as well, so that's a good example. Just relax. You will be failing. for a long time, just
Yes.
enjoying it. That's the process. You've been there before, but it's just like, no, no, you need to try harder. You need to be better. Why this foot doesn't do what you want to, why I cannot do it. I'm a martial artist. I should be able to catch
Mhm.
up really quickly. But then you think, no, just take it easy, relax, enjoy the process. And I see that as well for my clients. They are their worst enemies, criticizing themselves for every little thing and overthinking. And I think that the martial arts are very good for taking you away from that.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of brings me to the other skill as well that we're cultivating through training, which is learning to ground ourselves. And there's so much to say here, but the first thing is that we have a really great opportunity to feel our heart rates go up when we train in combat sports. Um, and this is awesome because it in some ways replicates what stress feels like in our bodies. Before we add the like sparring components and these levels of stress, just feeling your heart rate go up physiologically, so in your body, feels a
Mm,
lot like what happens when we get stressed. And the cool thing about this is that our brain and our body are like a feedback loop. Um, so what happens when we experience stress for most people is sometimes something happens, then we have a physical response. So let's say you called me something that I didn't like, or you said something that I didn't
mm,
like. I have a physical response to that. My brain is a logic making machine and it loves to find reasons, and it will find one. It will say, oh,
mm,
Les said something that I didn't like. It's Les's fault that I'm feeling this way. And because I'm feeling this way, my brain will then take that as evidence for the fact that what you said was actually bad.
mhm,
So, because I have a physical response, I then attach a meaning to what you said. On a different day, if I didn't have the physical response, I'd just be like, oh, is Les feeling okay? He's saying awful
mm,
things. So, the way that my body responds really impacts the way that I take on board the things in my environment. And when we talk about teaching people how to regulate their nervous system, to regulate their emotions, what we're actually asking people to do is to disrupt that loop for long enough to make a decision about how we want to respond. So you say something, my heart rate goes up. I feel my heart rate going up. I employ a grounding strategy, which could, for example, be, oh, I notice my heart rate's going up. What else do I notice? I notice my feet on the floor. I'm noticing everywhere that I can see the color blue. So all of these things that help pull us into the present moment.
mhm,
And then I'm deciding, actually, that was quite a lot for me. I want to take a break. I might say, I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed. I'm going to go get a drink, or
mhm,
I'm just going to go get walk down the street. I'm going to go for a walk, or whatever it is. I might remove myself from a situation and then continue using grounding strategies. Like I might feel my feet moving over the ground as I walk, or I might scan my body as I'm walking, whatever it is for me. And everyone's got different strategies that work for them. But we're really looking at that one moment of disruption. We're training a coupled response that when my heart rate goes up, I start calming myself down. And this has so many ways that it can be used outside of training. Of course, you can think of all the times where people say things at work, at, family, things like this. And then in training as well, we want to train ourselves that when my heart rate goes really up, and that can be related to fatigue, which you think about, for example, we're starting out Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, we're learning a new skill. My heart rate goes up. I'm much more amenable to getting annoyed and frustrated when I'm not getting the technique right because my
mhm,
physiology is already elevated. So starting to learn, oh, I'm feeling myself get elevated. Is this the best way for me to learn? Probably not, because we also know that when our heart rate goes up, we get tunnel visioned on threats. That's our body's way, our brain's way of making sure that we're okay. It thinks if my heart rate's going up, there might be a real danger involved. And when we talk about trauma survivors, this is also really important. So that our heart rate goes up, we get tunnel visioned, and we stop being able to think about, is what I'm doing right now rational? We just start to act impulsively, emotionally. So
mhm,
the more we can train ourselves to bring that back down, the better it's going to be for us throughout our whole lives, including when we're training on the mats. So I think this is a really cool skill to spend time practicing. Heart rate goes up. I use a grounding skill. And for us, we do that in a game we call pound and ground.
Hmm.
So this is a fun little play on ground and pound, but we do interval training. So it could be hitting the bag, hitting pads. Sometimes it's shadow boxing based. We bring our heart rate up, maybe takes 20 seconds, and then we'll do 30 seconds of grounding exercises and we'll repeat that for repetitions. And what I found is that clients will then come back and say, hey, I was able to use mindful walking as a grounding exercise. I did a body scan when this thing happened to me the other day. And the reason is that they might have been taught grounding skills by a therapist in talk therapy, sitting in a calm room where there's no threats going on. And it's very easy to imagine this skill, but it's kind of like reading about a technique in a book and then trying to do it in the ring.
Mm.
It's not quite going to work unless you practice. It's the same thing, like I say, with body connection, you need to do repetitions. With grounding skills, we want to do repetitions as well too. So if we
Mm.
can do that inside of classes, we're much more likely to be able to access it under stress in the like life ring, which is,
Hmm.
you know, anytime outside of training.
Yeah, I think that the another benefit of for grounding people is that martial arts are bare feet, and we very rarely bare feet.
Mm,
So you've got that extra sensation that you can actually focus. Yeah, I need to ground on something. Oh, my feet, the squidgy mats feel something, or wood floor feels something. So that's the
mm-hmm.
extra connection there. But very interesting. Another thing I'm going to be stealing and trying for my clients. Um,
Please.
yeah, that's why I love talking to people who do similar things but differently, because you can always learn something. And like you said, the grounding, I never thought about it this way. We probably doing it, I do that with my I've got an autistic student. Oh, he's a
Mm-hmm.
my assistant instructor now. He just passed his black belt training. But when he's got a bad day,
Incredible.
he's working in a shop and something goes wrong, it affects Holly's day. So we usually take him, let's go to the side, focus on your body, focus on your breathing, relax. So kind of you automatically do that things, because as children, I think we taught grounding by our parents, right? Stop hyperventilating, calm down, relax a bit, breathe. So it's nice to see that you incorporated that towards your clients. And I was gonna ask you,
Mm-hmm.
do you see a big resistance from people who went through trauma to step into the dojo? Don't your clients feel a bit intimidated by a kickboxing? Because martial arts got that kind of surrounding of macho man and everybody's tough and stuff. And I see that in my dojo, that people, even men, are overwhelmed and very stressed and fearful to do that first step. So I see that from a person who been recommended to me, it takes about a month of building up courage to actually step into the dojo or even reach out that, hey, I would like to come for training. Is that okay or not? How does that look like in your side?
Yeah, so we do a lot of work to try to create a space that feels very different to your traditional martial arts space. So currently, all our classes are facilitated in therapy clinics, so in psychology clinics,
Hmm.
in like group treatment rooms. So big, either like a big hall. One of our spaces is an old hall that's attached to a therapy center. And so you walk in and it's like there's essential oils and there's plants and there's calming music and there's a garden we go through into, a space that feels very different. And the other space that I teach at is in a psychology clinic. And so, there's some psychologists there, but otherwise it's a very quiet space. And there's a lot of natural light that comes through, but it feels very private. There's no people that can walk past because we're on the second level.
Hmm.
And so I think a lot about what does this space look like and how does that compare to typical kickboxing gyms. And the feedback I get a lot is that clients would not walk into a space that looks like that
Mm.
because exactly all of the things that you just said. So it's less about how do we help them overcome that and more about how do we meet clients where they're at. And that really is the trauma informed principle of safety, is thinking about how can I make a space safe enough that someone walks through the door and then is willing to keep coming back.
Mm. Excellent. Um, that's a very interesting thing, because it is completely different feel if you have it attached to a clinic and like you said, with the essential oils and stuff, and you're not going into a smelly gym with bags hanging and everybody sweated and boxing ring and stuff. So it must feel welcoming. I suppose that's the word for it. We're using as well the higher room, so it is kind of nice and bright, although everybody can see us because it's on the ground level with the loads of windows. But I think the atmosphere within is very important. So feedback for us is I make a lot of effort that we don't have cliques and groups that people just stay. If somebody comes in, the kind of
Yes.
culture for us is everybody approaches introduces themselves and try to take care of that one person who is overwhelmed and trying to be very friendly. So far, I've got a really good feedback from people, and I'm very happy about it. But how do you promote the culture of support within your group?
Yeah, so there's a few different components to that. So there's first, of course, the relationship between the facilitator, so that's me, and the clients. And the first part of that is how we model healthy boundaries. So
Mm,
how do we support people, but not totally dissolve all of our boundaries, which also feels unsafe to people, right, who are expecting there to be some level of professional boundaries. So
mhm,
thinking about things like how much disclosure is there. So if I'm working with trauma survivors, it's actually not necessary for me to hear disclosures of what happened.
mhm,
Relating to what we're doing in terms of learning kickboxing, I'm much more interested in how a person is impacted in the present moment, not what happened to them in the past. So we'll set that container by saying, you know, it's going to be safest for us both if we don't discuss things in traumatic detail. So someone might say, I was a victim of sexual assault, but they're not going to go into describing all of that. And when we really set that as a tone for the type of conversation that we have from the beginning, that will then spill into the collaborative work that we do as peers. So then there's the peer support element. So when you run a program that's advertised as being trauma informed, it's a program for women, and you're having then group discussion, you have a group of 6 or so women who are talking about their experiences. Again, we frame that with, you know, it's a rule that no one is allowed to discuss anything in traumatic detail. And people
mhm,
can also bring in anonymously their own rules. So they might note down some topics that they want to avoid. Really common ones are like no talking about dieting or weight loss. Other ones might just be like be supportive and respectful. Sometimes they can be very niche. For example, if somebody is neurodivergent, they might request that people not wear like overwhelming smells. But anything that we can do that can create a container where then we can have really beautiful conversations. And I think that's
mhm,
the best form of support, is for someone in a group to hear somebody else say, I really didn't want to show up today. I was terrified of doing kickboxing, but I came and it was scary, and that was my win for today.
mhm,
And for the other person to go, oh, I also was really scared to come, even though I knew it was trauma informed and the space looks inviting, it's still scary. Somebody else might say something like, you know, I've been really disconnected from my body, and today I was able to feel my body for the first time in I don't know how long. And that's not the kind of thing that you would just say in passing to someone catching up for a coffee. You know,
yeah.
it's really difficult to discuss things that relate to trauma, because you've got to set the scene by saying, here's all the things that have happened to me. This is what trauma means. Here's how I'm experiencing it now. And even past all of that, the person, you know, can be empathetic, but they're not really going to understand. And to have a space where people really do understand what that's like and they can learn that they're not alone, that I think is something that is so, so powerful. And that's what we really try to cultivate in terms of support for clients for their peer-to-peer relations. Um, and then just on a more kickboxing based level, I love classes where I basically sit back and do nothing. You know, maybe
Mhm,
somebody's done a few more classes than I've done, and in their pairs they help each other out. And I'll hear people saying things like, I don't know if this is right, but the way that it helps my brain to think about it is that I'm like cutting cheese with my elbow, or I don't know, they make up all these like fun ways that make sense for their bodies, for how they conceptualize techniques, and they teach each
Mm,
other. And sometimes they'll come back and be like, am I allowed to say that? Is that okay? But more oftentimes I'll just kind of melt into the background and not really be there. And if I can give everyone an invitation for something to experiment with, and working together, they can experiment with that and refine the technique and make it slightly better than it was at the start of the class by their own trial and error, that's a
mm,
big win. And that's probably the third thing that we haven't spoken about yet, is that in trauma informed practice, being invitational is at the center of absolutely everything. It's the biggest difference between trauma informed kickboxing and traditional kickboxing.
mm. Can you expand on that? Going back into the story, the cutting cheese.
Mm,
I think we as humans we love stories. So when I'm working with people, especially with
yes.
elderly, um, and I teaching a
Mm-hmm.
form, I always use a story to build it. So our kind of tensho kata, which is kind of looks like cleaning the house. So you're wiping
Mm-hmm.
the shelf, you're going under, then you put something on top, get the water. People absolutely love it, right? Yeah, exactly. Tensho from Kyokushin, right? So we create story to that,
Yes.
or we've got
Yes.
the one kata where we are in a submarine and we're opening the locks and stuff like that. So people absolutely loving it, and I think it's a really nice way of introducing people to a complex movement that they can understand, right, or relate to the activity. Um, any take on
Mm.
that?
I love that. We don't really do much storytelling. I'm thinking now how we could potentially incorporate more of that. And I suppose if I take it from a client-centered invitational lens, it might be
Mm.
an invitation for clients to create their own stories. Yeah, I haven't tried yet, so I'll have to have a play. Just like you, I'm always going away and thinking about what can we build into our
Mm.
practice that might be helpful, could make it even better. So I'll play with that and I'll come back to you.
Yes, so
But in
we had
terms of invitation,
yeah, go on, go on, go
no,
on.
you go.
So we had a new client coming to my class, and we'd actually done a boxing drill. So we then
Mm-hmm.
left, right, and hook, and she couldn't do a hook at all.
Mm-hmm.
She was keep doing kind of between uppercut and a hook. It didn't help that she's deaf, but I
Mm-hmm.
managed to. She lip reads, and with my
Mm-hmm.
accent, it's not so easy. But we managed to overcome that. And for her, it was very helpful that I said, imagine you've got a kitchen cupboard, and you just need to close it with a pushing the handle and protecting yourself with the elbow. And within a couple of times, she had, oh, okay, that's the story. I'm making a cup of tea. I done take the bag, put the bag, close the drawer. So there's a
Yes,
mini story for her to do something, right? You
I
do
absolutely love that.
stories about something that it relates to the daily life. She's British. She must love tea. So
I mean, with the hooks, we talk a lot about stirring a big cauldron. It's never
yeah.
stirring a pot; it's always a cauldron, because everyone seems to love the idea that they could be a witch,
See,
which is much more
I,
exciting than stirring soup, you know.
I'm saying monkey mixing wine. That's from the Drunken Master with Jackie Chan. Monkey stirring wine.
Yes.
Okay, can you say more
Yeah, it's
about the
wonderful.
third component you started to say, and I interrupted you.
Not at all. Yes, absolutely, I can. So, like I said, I think it is arguably the most important thing in trauma informed kickboxing is that everything is an invitation and it is not an instruction. So rather than we're doing this, you're doing this, now go do this, everything in our class is, if you like, you could experiment with pushing your fist out, or if you like, you could try pushing something back with the bottom of your foot, or pushing something back with your knee. And there's so many pieces to why this is important. The first is that it is, in my experience, the best way at ensuring people are as safe as possible.
Mm,
So, in terms of working with trauma survivors, and we're trying to create an environment where they're not triggered, not that we're wrapping them in wool, but we have this concept in trauma we call the window of tolerance, which I'm not sure if you talk about a lot on this podcast, but for your listeners who aren't familiar, the window of tolerance is like your capacity for resilience.
Mm-hmm.
So it is an idea about when we are inside of our window of tolerance, that is when we can use our rational thinking brain. It's also when we can engage with other people. So I can have a conversation with you, I can reason with you. It's when I'm calm. But when we go outside of our window of tolerance, we either go outside into a fight or a flight or a
Mm-hmm.
freeze response. Um, and for somebody to be at the edges of their window of tolerance, that's the really cool point. That's where magic happens. That's where growth happens, right at the edge. Or you could think about it as at the edges of their comfort zone. But
Mm-hmm.
if you actually push someone all the way outside of their window of tolerance, it's not that they can't come back inside, but it's actually much harder once you've flipped that switch into somebody goes into a fight or a flight or a freeze response
Mm-hmm.
for them to come back and then to be able to learn, because now your nervous system thinks it's in preservation mode. When we're preserving, we're not learning the details of a roundhouse kick. It's just
Mm-hmm.
not going to stick in our memory. So from a learning perspective, but also for that client, then they're starting to build a neural connection between martial arts equals I go outside of my window of tolerance. So we
Mm-hmm.
really want to keep people inside their window. And the best way to do that is to let them dictate what they do and don't participate in. So rather than me pushing someone and saying like keep working, come, like even if I'm doing it in a really nice way, or I'm being like hell yeah, like let's keep pushing this pace, like one more minute of hard work, we got this team, that's overriding someone's ability to say how comfortable they feel in that moment. And there's so many variables that can impact that. I think even thinking in a post-COVID world, a lot of people have POTS,
Mm-hmm.
now with their heart rate going up, it's really hard for a lot of people breathing these days. And loads of other chronic conditions, the relationship between the heart rate going up and stress, of why as someone on the outside looking at someone, you can't tell how much more they have in their tank. And so
Mm-hmm.
we really take that away and let that be very self-directed. And by doing that, most clients will say no before they go outside their window, and then we don't have to worry about getting them back
Mm-hmm.
inside. And it's a really important part of the work that we do in doing that. That's just one part of it, of why it's helpful. The other part is that a lot of people don't get many opportunities in life to say, no, I don't want to do that. We feel like we have to do things. There's so many obligations that we have, whether it's with work or with family, particularly if you've been the victim of abuse, which is typically long term. It's a
Mm-hmm.
long period of time of not having your own wants and needs met and focusing solely on what the other person wants. And so in in karate, we have this real senpai kohai, like seniors above juniors. And if I'm higher ranked than you, I tell you what to do no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
We totally melt that away in trauma informed kickboxing and say that the person in front of me is the best person to judge what they are and aren't able to be able to do in this class. And so invitations really remind people that, hey, you don't have to do anything that I'm inviting you to try. Nothing that I'm telling you to do is mandatory. The fact that you've stepped in to this room, that you've stepped on the mat, doesn't equal you will now consent to everything throughout the class. So yeah, we use invitations, and then we give options as well too, which can also be helpful. So, you could do it this way or you could do it that way. You might practice a double jab or it could be a single jab. You could
Mm-hmm.
practice hitting the pads, or you could practice hitting pool noodles, or you could practice hitting the air, or you could just hold pads but not hit pads, right versa, or you might work on a
Mm-hmm.
bag, but you might not want to work with a partner. So giving people as many options as possible so that they can take ownership over what's going to help them stay in their window of tolerance is really important.
Mm. Yeah, we do very similar based on the people's abilities. So they always can say, no, I don't want to do this, or we try to modify it. So they still do the activity. So for me, it's very important they are
Mm.
included, right? So I've got people with MS, deafness, autism. So
Mm-hmm.
they physically cannot do everything. But simple ways you can include them. So, for example, our friend Jason, he cannot bend down. So when we do a game, flipping the cones one way or the other, he is judging or timing. So he's still within the activity, but I've got a different role. So I think that is
Hmm.
very important to give people a choice because not everybody can do everything what the other can do, right? We all different, and I can't kick high, so why should I be forced to kick high, right? Um, but yeah, that giving them that ownership of the relationship with you. And I just want to clarify that it's not all the karate like that, right? The Okinawan style is more relaxed. The Japanese style is more the kind of what do you call it? Lost the word for it. The hierarchic one. In Okinawa is more kind of relaxed. We are
Yes.
totally relaxed. We've got one very strict rule when people coming in, and that's don't get stressed, be relaxed. Which people like panic. Oh no, rules.
Nice.
Oh, okay, just don't get get stressed. But yeah, that's that's
I like
that
that.
that's a beautiful way of running a club, and yeah, I think that's wonderful what you do. Now a bit more personal question to you. What do you
Mm.
think the martial arts, what impact they had on your own mental health? Um, Positive, negative, no impact?
I'll start with the negative. I think historically, martial arts gave me an excuse to maintain my eating disorder. So when
Mm-hmm.
I was younger and I was competing, particularly, combat sports, the real sport component of it, it's a sport that's in weight classes. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
very normal for people to constantly be on diets. And that made it really easy for me to always be on a diet when I didn't need to. And in fact, it was really hurting my body to be continuously dieting this light.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really oftentimes, unfortunately, the culture, particularly in kickboxing, in my experience, was how lean can you be? What is the lightest possible weight class you can get to? And then how much
Mm-hmm.
water can you possibly cut to get some tiny advantage? And there may be some truth to that, but relative to the impact on your mental health, I think there should be no comparison. And it's something that I'm quite vocal at speaking to what I would say is amateur athletes about,
Oh.
is that you've got all the time in the world to be professional and want to be in a smaller weight class, but for now it's just definitely not worth your mental health, although no one probably could have told me that at the
Mm.
time.
But yeah, I totally agree with you. I think the cutting weight, I've seen that to the really horrendous degree in wrestling as well. I was coaching wrestling in Poland, and I
Mm.
think it should be banned. It's not good for mental health. It's not good for your health. You can see now, like MMA fighters start speaking about how much havoc it causes to your body, and it just should be banned, in my opinion.
I agree 100%. I think the tricky part is that we're so under resourced in like more amateur levels, that the at the level where it's probably possible to ban it is at the
Mm,
professional level, where they can do weigh-ins leading up to the fight and do dehydration tests and things like that. But and it's one of the reasons why these days I compete in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, because I can, you know, weigh in is on the day. There's much less weight cutting associated with it. And in theory, if you've got good technique, you should be comfortable to be in a
mm,
slightly higher weight class. So now I compete at the bottom of my weight class. So
mm-hmm,
that means, where I'm on the border between light and middle, I go to middle
mm-hmm,
to remove the stress, and also to kind of force my brain not to go back into the temptation of the disordered eating, because for those who haven't experienced an eating disorder, it's very tough, because a lot of society will tell you that the things you're doing are good, and you kind of miss the eating disorder because you miss being allowed to diet in some ways, and it's
mm-hmm,
very tempting to go back to being on a diet. There's a part of you that always wants to. So yeah, nowadays martial arts are a very helpful way for me to need to fuel my body in order to train. to do well in training, to learn new techniques, because I think the thing that's holding me back the most isn't my weight, it's my lack of
Mm.
technical skill. Um, and then fitness after that, and weight is very far down on the
Mm.
list. So I think that's a good way for people maybe to pivot out of weight cutting, is to think about it like that. Like if your jiu-jitsu was really that good, it wouldn't matter if they were 2 kilos
Mm.
heavier than you, which ends up being the difference if you're at the bottom of your class. But that was a really tough time for me, dealing with that. And especially, I think you get a lot of praise when you have like I'm doing air quotes for people
Mhm.
listening, like the fit fighter body. When you're weight cutting, a lot of people will tell you how great you look. And they think they're being so nice, but the problem is, how unrealistic the diet that you're on is, because it's for a
Mm.
short window. And so after the fight, it becomes an insult, because they said, "Oh, well,
Mm.
you look so great then. If I look great then what does that mean now? That I look not great?" Your brain
Mm.
takes it to the absolute opposite. Um, so that was something that's been very difficult mental health wise for me in martial arts. But the positives are far, far greater than that negative component. And so I think for me, I'm a very fidgety person. I like moving a lot. I can
Mm.
feel if I haven't been training enough, because I don't have the same brain. My
Mhm.
temper is, becomes short. My emotions are higher. If I haven't, really had some good hard training, and for me, I really enjoy the hard training component of it. I feel it. I feel it. And everyone in my house is also a martial artist. And I think we're all the same, where we'll be at the point of being like, you know, you need to go to the gym. You're starting to really like annoy everybody else in the house.
I know
You
the
can
feeling.
definitely feel that. And I think that's a really obvious, simple thing, but very, very important. And then the community piece, which in my research, like very informal research in talking to people about why martial arts is so helpful for their mental health and beneficial, community comes up a lot. And there's something so special about the trust that you develop with people that you train with, because you're allowing them to hit you or strangle you or put you in positions where they could potentially hurt you, and you're trusting them not to. And it's
Mm.
like a very accelerated relationship. Of course, there's all the dose, the DOSE. So we're getting all this dopamine and oxytocin and serotonin and endorphins and all these feel good brain
Mhm.
chemicals happening while we're together. And so these bonds are also incredibly strong, I think, because of that. Yeah, the community element is so great. And I think, even like I was talking about before, about how we're very um externally focused into our technology,
Mhm.
as an adult, when we have, work, maybe family, there's not a lot of time where people, I think, actually catch up with friends. And there's a lot of research showing now people are having fewer and fewer and fewer friends.
Mhm.
But I know that if I'm not on the mats, I'm going to be missed. That people are going to start calling me and being like, where have you been? Like, why aren't you training? And so having that like accountability of having friendships means that I
Mm.
actually do develop friendships, and then those spill out into going for brunch after competition class, or cheering for each other at competitions. And those are really beautiful friendships that end up
Mm.
getting forged, and something that, like, I'm so grateful for, not just in the local friendships that I have, but even it makes traveling so great. I can go to any country in the world and have almost
Mm.
an instant community. And I love that. I've been to so many countries where I get to go to like bars and cafes with locals,
Mm.
because I'm not seen as a tourist. You're like just instantly a part of the team. And
Yeah.
even you can study in different languages. You can still get the gist of what they're talking about by piecing together, the movements. And once we're rolling or sparring or hitting pads together, we don't even really need to speak the same language, but we can build a connection with somebody. And I
Mm.
think that's something that's really cool.
Yeah, there's something magical about the hard physical activity between people. The I don't know, the understanding of each other grows immediately, and you don't even have to, like you said, you're going somewhere abroad, you meet people, you talk while we're doing karate, kickboxing, BJJ. I'm your man. I know what you're talking about. I've been there. I know how hard it is. So you're instantly building that trust and, kind of a understanding for each other within the community that, you're my tribe. I know what you went through. I know how hard I've been training. We are the same. But on the note of your eating disorder, well done
Mm,
for managing it. I've got few friends who've got, unfortunately, daughters who've got a anorexia, and it
mm.
is a very difficult to overcome that disorders. This is one of the most difficult disorders to control, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really, really tough. And there's, like I said, there's a lot of components that come to that. And when you add sport into the mix, it can sometimes become even more difficult. And
Mm,
a lot of people, I think, end up having to totally step away from sport. And a lot of the clients that I work with as well are looking for a way to slowly reintroduce movement into their lives in a way that's not then going to become a new mechanism to lose weight.
mm,
Um, so how can we do things like take away mirrors and remove conversations about weight loss and just things that come up so often in fitness classes where the teachers will be saying like push a little bit harder, burn off that dinner, like all of these type of things really have a big impact on somebody who's in recovery from an eating disorder. But I will say too, support network is super important. I have a very supportive partner who was just so pivotal in helping me see my new body as being okay. And I think too, when you have an athlete identity, it all gets wrapped
hmm
up in that, and you have an ideal about what you think needs to match who you see that you are as a martial artist, as if like having a six pack equals good at combat sports, which we know is just
mm,
like doesn't make sense, but that's not really the way that our brain doesn't really work by making sense. Even though it's always
mm,
looking for logic and reason, like I said, our actual decisions come from a much deeper, older part of the brain, which
mm.
isn't as good as reason and logic.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I wrote that in a couple of my books and always say that to my friends that karate in itself is not as helpful as the non-judgmental environment you're in it. If you've got a group of people
Mm,
who you can come in and be yourself and nobody's judging you and you not hear that comments like you said, oh, you don't have a six pack, you can't kick high, you cannot do the break fall. I think that's the key to help that having that community. And like you said on the very beginning, we are biased because we are martial artists. But if you've got that community of whatever, chess, beavers or rainbows like my daughter goes, and you feel welcome and you're not judged, it's that I think that's the key to be helped.
yeah, there's something huge in that. And it's almost like becoming an adult is becoming more and more aware of how you need to preserve your image, you know.
Mm,
And I think maybe that's one of the things that ends up happening in combat sports is like you really you can't half-ass them too, in a lot of ways you can't try and be like, oh, I'm so cool, I don't try hard at doing a
mm,
kick, because the kick just doesn't work unless you're really concentrating and you're putting effort into it. If you just kind of like lazily throw a leg out there,
mm,
especially when you're first learning, it's just absolutely not going to work. Jiu-jitsu, you lazily do a throw, you're going to get taken down if you
yep.
don't fully commit to taking somebody's weight on top of you. You kind of have to put that ego part aside and just say like, I'm going to really try, and doesn't matter if I mess up or what happens in front of these people. Otherwise, like, it just doesn't work.
Yeah, you have to get used to it a lot, especially on the beginning, to be embarrassed and overcome that embarrassment because you're gonna do a lot of things wrong. So I like to say that karate is built on control failure. So you're going in, you're gonna
Mm,
fail, 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 but then let's say a couple of years in, you look back, and in karate you've got a belt system, so that's you got
yes.
a visual kind of confirmation how many times you overcome an obstacle and how far you're down the road. And I've noticed that with that getting used to it to overcome the obstacles that kind of transfer related to life. And I use again Danny as a example, because Danny is autistic. He came to us, he couldn't be with us without his mom and brother. Now, 10 years down the road, he's going for a competition where there's 200 people competing, and he's doing it on his own. And as well, outside of that, his mom said he's completely changed. We used to struggle going swimming. All new activity was no, I don't want it. And now he just goes, no, I'm gonna challenge. I'm gonna see it. I take it as a challenge. I see if I can do it. So that overcoming mechanisms start to being built in into your personality, and then you can go on and yeah, oh, I tried this outside. Oh, I tried this. I might be failing, but it's okay. I'm allowed to fail.
Yes, I love that. I also like to bring the neuroscience of failure into my classes as well too. And I'll sit everyone down and say, I'm a big geek. I'm really interested in neuroscience. So if you
Mhm,
want to listen to me geek out about it, this is helpful. You can listen to this. If it's not, you can zone out for a moment. But failure is so important because it triggers a different state in our brain. So as adults, our brains are no longer as plastic as they are when we're
mhm,
kids. When we're kids, we can learn things and they become part of our brain so easily. But as adults, our brain has started pruning away unnecessary information. It's harder for us to learn new things. And there are two really great ways that you can actually trigger neuroplasticity in your brain. The first is to upset your balance. So to upset your balance in multiple different directions that are
mhm,
new to your system. So there's basically little marbles rolling around in your brain, and when you get them rolling in directions they don't usually go in, somehow that triggers a new state in your brain. Amazing. But even more cool is that when you make a mistake, so when your brain, if I think, if I take my arm from here, I'm going to reach my cup, I'm going to pick it up,
mhm,
and something goes wrong in that predictive, so my brain is predicting a path. When I execute the action, the prediction that I had didn't quite come true, which is a fancy way of saying I made a mistake.
mhm,
That failure of the predicted pathway triggers neuroplasticity. So if you come into my class and you get everything pretty well and you're not really making mistakes, you're also not really learning because you're not going to
mhm,
trigger neuroplasticity. But if you come in and you make all of these mistakes and you stumble and you fall over a bit, and you miss the target, or you're just failing over and over again, you're opening up your brain to being rewired, a completely new brain in learning new skills. So making mistakes isn't just like, good for your character and all these other things, but also it's the literal way that we learn from a neurophysiological level, which is
amazing stuff. I'll be using that now. Everybody be bad. Do mistakes all the
yeah.
time.
Exactly. What's the worst mistake that you could possibly make? Or I also love, like, what is the spectrum of ways we could possibly do this technique? And
Hmm.
let's play with it. Like if we're doing an uppercut, I call it the Popeye uppercut, which is like taking as big of a wine, like kind of doing like
Oh
a
yeah, yeah.
windmill with your arm and doing like an uppercut, versus like what's the smallest uppercut you could possibly do? Like how little could you possibly move your
Mm,
arms and still manage to like move it a little bit? And if that's the spectrum, let's experiment with everything in between that
mm,
and see where your body wants to land. Because I can make an argument for any way to do a technique. I can dream up a story. Actually, this is kind of
mm,
where I do storytelling. Is I'll be like, well, hypothetically, let's say I landed a knee and then the person was just like doubled over and I forgot about morals and ethics and I knew they weren't going to be able to see my punch coming, but I wanted to punch them one more time. So I could swing my arm through the air and then I would
mm,
take like the biggest wind up ever and hit them with that technique. I can make a story for that. If that's what feels good for you, that's what feels
mm,
like it's the right technique. We can do it that way, but let's play with the spectrum and see where your body wants to land, and then people naturally work out how they want to do a technique. Because I'm not the best martial artist in the world. I don't have all the answers. I'm good at
mm,
answering questions with questions rather than telling people exactly how to deliver the perfect technique, because to be honest, probably don't even know.
mm. I think this is a so my teacher was like that. Every question he answered with question, and I think because of that,
Mm.
I'm not the best in the world by any means, But I think that give me a better opportunity to understand what I'm looking for because I had to do the hard work instead of being given on a plate.
Yeah. It's like today, right? You want to go to somewhere new, you pull up your phone, you open Google Maps, it tells you go left, go right, go
Mm,
straight, you pay attention. At the end of that journey, if you were to go back to the start, or if you need to drive back home, the likelihood you're going to be able to do that is very low.
mm,
But if you take a map, a physical paper map, we used to have a Melways, like a
hmm
book with all of the maps of the state that I live in, and you would look at it before you left. Maybe you would use a pen and you would mark out the route that you were going to take, and you would plan it, and you would say like, no, I'm not going to go this way, maybe I'm going to go this way. Then you take the route, maybe you make some mistakes, you take a wrong turn, you pull over, you consult the map, you figure it out again. This is going to stick in your brain because you had to actually do problem solving, as
mm,
opposed to someone just telling you adjust your foot this way, adjust your I can do all of this. And in coaching and what I learned anyway at university in terms of motor learning is that this is going to generate a performance, but it doesn't generate learning, and learning
mm,
is performance that is sustained over time. So if you come back 3 weeks later and you ask someone to do a side kick and they have no idea because you coached 100% of it, you got a performance out of them, but it
mm,
hasn't actually stuck in their nervous system, they're not going to be able to do it. Or if you ask them to do it in a field instead of in the dojo and the environment's different, these are the type of conditions that a movement needs to be tested within in order to
mm.
actually be learned. Otherwise, it's a performance. And I think mistakes is how we generate that.
Yeah, karate is notorious for overcoaching. Every finger, 2 millimeters away, put it in there. Do that. Don't do this. Do that. Bend it like that. Bend it like that. That's not it. It's just no time for learning the technique. You're just thinking about all the micro adjustment you have to do. And I
Mm-hmm.
find it in myself. Sometimes I try to record the form, the kata, different
Mm-hmm.
angle, and I'm not facing as I'm usually facing, and just like, what the hell is going on? I can't really do it. It's not, wrong environment. I can't move this way. I can't move this way. It's just like overwhelming. So, but that's what I love about current times. We've got access to so much data and science that we can discard some of the past methods and build up new, better students than ourselves.
What a time to be alive. I really think that. I think it sometimes feels a bit like, God, everything's going bad. If you watch the news, it feels like that. But on the
Mm,
other hand, it's the coolest time. It's the coolest time for martial arts in history. We've never known as much as we know right now.
exactly. Yeah, very, very much true. So you said that in your household, everybody does martial arts. Are you coming from a
Mm-hmm.
martial arts family, or did you get into the martial arts family?
Both. So my mum did karate, and that's how I
Hmm
got interested in karate in the beginning. Is she uh trained for, I can't remember how long, maybe 6 or 7 years, then stepped away to have kids for 10 years and went back
hmm
to it. Um,
Sounds like my
and at
wife.
that point, then I got interested. Yeah, yeah, it was very cool because she was, a higher rank than me. Obviously, she's also my mother, so there was like that
Mm,
element to it. But as a teenager, that's where you're very much like, I don't respect you and all these things. But I was, in the dojo, and the Shians were telling me off for not being respectful enough towards my
mm,
mother or to anyone. And this is the other thing that I think karate really taught me is humility. When I
mm,
was, first starting, I was very much like, I'm going to be a black belt and I'm going to do all of these things. And I had all these ideas about what being a black belt meant. When I got my black belt, I was like, I don't know anything.
mhm.
um but um so my mom trained, and she and I trained a lot, and in fact she was my last fight for my showdown grading, which was very cool.
Awesome.
Super meaningful, like the final boss in a video game to get through your mum, like
I can hear the
so
music now from like 80s games.
yeah, exactly is exactly like that. So that was my start into martial arts. And then my partner, who I've been with for 6 years, we met
Mhm,
in Thailand training. So he does Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and I was doing Muay Thai at that time, but now
And
obviously
you met
dabble
in
in some jiu-jitsu,
and you met in Thailand,
we met in
BJJ.
Thailand. Yes. So, yeah. And people from Melbourne doing, combat sports in Thailand, which is my favorite place in the world for the combat sports community. The street they call the Soi in Thailand, where it's like Tiger Muay Thai and Phuket Top Team and a bunch of other gyms, and everyone there is into like fitness and combat sports, and it's just a very cool place. But yeah, we met there, and then eventually met back in Melbourne and started dating, which is very
I
cute.
I had
And we
I had
also
had
live with his brother.
oh, okay. I
Sorry,
had the
go ahead.
pleasure I had the pleasure to be in Lumpini because my wife is half Thai, so we've got a Thai family in Bangkok. So
So
yeah,
good.
and the food is amazing.
It's amazing, amazing. Yes. I always think about the food in Thailand, just like how good it is, how cheap it is. Yeah, would love to go. Would go back to Thailand in an absolute instant, and just like going there and training is the best. But yeah, would live with him, and then live with also his brother, who
Hmm.
now does Brazilian jiu-jitsu as well. His girlfriend's over a lot. She does jiu-jitsu as well. Our previous housemates, it's very common, I think, in combat sports. There's a weird phenomenon that I notice. I don't know if you notice this too, but I noticed that, for example, if let's say I need something, like I need a mechanic, I'm going to go to the gym and I'm going to be like, who knows a mechanic? Who's a
Yeah.
mechanic here? It's like I trust this person because they're good at jujitsu equals good mechanic. Like that is literally karate math. Like
Mm,
you've heard of girl math and boy math.
mm,
Karate math is like, this person, I train with them, therefore their services in whatever industry they must be
mm,
good. It doesn't matter what it is, I blindly trust that they're going to be good. So lots of housemates that we've met also through combat sports, so we've just been like, yeah, come stay with us for a while, or we
mm.
have a room, you can rent it. If we're looking to fill a room, I'll always reach out to people in the combat sports first, because we've got mats in the house, we want to practice. It's good to have
Yeah.
training partners around and stuff like that. People who get it, want to go to bed early so they can get up and train the next day. I think that's important too. You don't want a house
Mm,
that's half into late nights and partying and
yeah.
half into fitness and choking people for fun.
So what's in the future for it's Conscious Combat Club, right?
Yeah. So we spoke about the type of spaces that we're in. The
Hmm.
near future, I hope, for us is creating a dedicated space. So campaigning hard to raise funds now through government, grant funding, corporate partnerships, philanthropy, you name it, so that we can open a dedicated trauma-informed movement center. So I want to see if we can run that as a full-time space for people.
Do you have any like a link to a fundraiser or something like that, or donation where people could, because we can put it in show
Yep.
notes. So if you guys want to
Pop
support
it in the show notes.
Georgia's, yeah, just click and donate something. Every dollar counts, isn't it?
A hundred
And
percent. Yeah, absolutely.
and it's funny how it's just every martial artist's dream. I'm heading the same direction. I want to have my own dojo as well, where we can, support people in our own space. But that's kind of few years ahead of us. But it's gonna happen. There's no other way. Um,
A hundred
drop us.
percent. And I think that the closer we get to that too. Oh, you go ahead.
Let it go. I was just gonna say that, if you can share all the where people can find you, promote your podcasts, whatever you need to help your case.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything's at Conscious Combat Club. So our website's consciouscombat.club. Our Instagram's consciouscombat.club. And I'll share that all with you so that you can pop it down into the show notes. But also anybody who's creating work like this, I think the more we can point to other work, so I can say to the Australian government, like, hey, over in the UK they have this thing, Karate for Mental Health, here's what they're doing, here's
Mm,
their evidence base. It becomes a global evidence base,
mm,
and I think it adds so much more weight to our grant applications, to the work that we're doing. It means we can start to establish a body that says, like, hey, when somebody who runs a martial arts gym gets wind of the idea of adding buzzwords like trauma informed and mental health to their gym, but maybe isn't as genuinely
Mm,
invested in what that looks like and how they might need to do things differently, then we can say, like, hey, actually there's this network of people who have some pretty decent consensus about what actually should be happening in this space, and
mhm,
what you're doing is not quite that. Or other people who are like, what you're doing looks very aligned with our work, I would refer people to,
mm,
go and see you. And I think that I love that in the spaces that I've been in so far with people like yourself, um who are doing work like this. Everyone's been very open, wanting to share their ideas, wanting to collaborate, wanting to elevate other people, which is just, it's very much the karate spirit. It's very much the martial arts spirit. So it's very cool to see that, and I think it will only make the world a better place.
And on that note, let's finish. Thank you very much, Georgia.
Awesome.
Always pleasure to you, talking to you. And again, I'm sorry it took me so long to get you on my show.
No worries at all. Thank you for having me. It must have been divine timing. It was meant to be at this time.
Yeah, it always happens for a reason.
I believe so.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.